Hey everybody, it's Andrew with AFC Dad, Adoption Foster Care Dad, and I want to talk to you tonight a little bit about a conversation I had with my oldest son this evening that was quite uncomfortable. We were both kind of squirming. We weren't really sure how to have this talk. It wasn't the one that's traditional. We had a talk tonight about white privilege. Those are funny words even coming out of my mouth. I want you to get the full context of tonight's discussion. This video serves as kind of a behind the scenes and a little bit extra information, but the main post is on afcdad.com. Look for the talk we must have. So I grew up in the South. I grew up in the South in the 80s and 90s, and I remember living in tension with this from an early age. I kind of remember this racial imbalance and this racial inequity. It's probably a better way to say it, kind of at the back of my mind growing up. No one really had to explicitly tell me about it. Um, Part of my family lived in an urban area in a minority majority city. The other part of my family lived about as rural as you could get in eastern North Carolina. And so in the back of my mind, there was always kind of this tension that was going on. And so I kind of was aware of it from an early age, but I don't ever remembering it being directly addressed. What I do remember, though, is my parents from an early age teaching me that everyone that I encounter and everyone I meet should be treated with respect and kindness and treated fairly. And while we may have differences in political ideas or we may have differences in culture, we're all worthy of the same respect. And that's something that I remember being instilled from an early age, and I've really worked hard to instill that in the lives of my kids and my family now. And I remember my dad really modeling that right across the road out in the country from where my grandmother and my aunts lived was an elderly, when I was younger, she passed many years ago, but was an elderly African American lady, and her name was Miss Estabel. And she was the sweetest soul. And I remember when I would go down and visit the farm or visit the land down there, um, that we would. It was a privilege. It was kind of fun in the summertime to go across the uh, fields and get to go across the little bridge in the ditch and cross the busy road at the time, which is really just a backcountry road. But when you're little, it's busy, and go and check on Miss Estabel and see how she's doing. And I remember that. And I remember that her house was very different than my grandmother's house. I remember that she was a very simple lady. I remember that my grandmother and her had a sweet friendship that had developed over time from living near one another out in the country. And I remember my dad modeling through his actions the kindness that you display to others. Might be from a different, someone from a different race or someone from a different background. And I remember that very, very clearly growing up. Well, growing up and now my own family and as a foster parent and as an adoptive parent, we have children right here in our own home that and children that have been here before that are no longer with us and maybe one day more children to come that have different skin colors than we do and different races and ethnicities and different cultures than we do. And so as a family, my wife and I have always tried to teach our kids that we're all image bearers of God. We're all created in His image, and maybe He used different shades in the crayon box, but we're all image bearers, and we all need to appreciate and respect one another. It wasn't for the past couple of years till we started attending the current church that we're at, and things have started to erupt on the national scene. And friends of ours, we are very blessed to have many friends of various backgrounds and ethnicities in our lives that have poured into our kids for years, that are um, second moms and second dads to our kids, and just really blessed with that. But it hasn't been the past couple of years that this idea of confronting and understanding, even for myself, my wife, for us to understand this concept of white privilege um, has come about. And it's unfortunately, come about through many tragedies that we've heard in the news and that we've experienced in the nation. But it has forced us to have an internal conversation first with ourselves of what is this? It's forced us to reach out to our friends of color and people of color to help us understand what this is and what this means and how this relates to our lives. And it really has taken a while for us to realize, and sadly so, that this is a conversation that extends beyond ourselves, but extends to our children. Now, we've always been open with our children about the difference in race and ethnicity. We've always been resolute in um, talking to them about the painful chapters in our nation's history and talking about the struggles that people of color have today. We have visited the Civil Rights Institute, for example, in Birmingham, where some of our family lives, multiple times to really have that discussion at different age levels and really reaffirm that. Here closer to home, there is a state historic site called Historic Stagville, and there are some very rare two-story cabins for enslaved people there. And on the foundations of these cabins, you can see the fingerprints of the enslaved bricklayers. And it is something to walk up to that and place your own fingers there and really feel connected with history, and give a great opportunity to connect our children of different backgrounds and different races to that moment in history. In fact, I wrote about that, and there's a blog that you can look for called Thoughts on Race and Culture. I think that's the name of it. You can just do a quick search, and it should come up on the AFC, on dad.com. So, white privilege, it's weird words even for me to say out loud. It's very uncomfortable, but it's something that we all have to do. And I think many people in majority culture, when we hear about that, we think it's a recent made-up term, that it's a politically charged term, that it defines you with one political party versus another. And the more I've come to study it and the more I've come to think about it, the more I realize that's not really true. What it is just a realization of a basic fact in our society here in the United States, that as wonderful and great as our nation is, and my son and I talked at length tonight about how great our nation is. We talked about how we are blessed with the freedoms that we have, that there are people around the world that can't vote, that can't worship freely, that can't have free speech, that live in horrible dictatorships and horrible conditions, the people that don't have a free society for commerce and all of that, and how America is a beautifully rich, diverse, free, blessed country. But we're not perfect. And we have a very big crack in our society that started back during the foundation of our nation. And it's based upon this premise that for some reason, one skin tone has more value and more worth and more dignity and more power than another skin tone or any other skin tone. And it's a real shame that that is something that is part of our history and our upbringing. But that crack in our foundation of our great nation is kind of permeated through the years and permeated through the different eras. And we talked about that. Our kids we talked about that, my son and I, tonight. We talked about how it connected with things that he's learning in school, e-school, fun times, but the history of our country and that he's learned in previous years, about how that connected from slavery through the Civil War, through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, and through the current struggles that our nation has today. And so we took that a step further, and we just talked about that simple fact, and that's really all white privilege is that for some reason this skin tone comes with things that other people's doesn't, and it has a historical root and a modern application, and it's a really hard thing for our society to overturn. And so we talked about looking at our own family, that my oldest son, my second oldest son, are adopted, and we were blessed that they came into our lives many years ago. We watched them grow to be excellent young men. We definitely have some health struggles in our family and some things that if you've been following with us, um, you know that we definitely have some struggles that has come from their past previous experiences and things that they have lived experience with and some of their adverse childhood experiences. But um, they are both white, and we have two younger children that currently are in foster care, and their trajectories are unknown at this point. We pray that they are become a permanent part of our family. If reunification is not an option for one child, it's not. For the other child, it's certainly in play. And so, if they are not able to be, the one child's not able to be reunified, and for the other child that is free for adoption, if their plans allow for them to stay with our family, we're going to definitely have two children that are going to experience one set of life when they grow older, and two children that are going to have experiences that our friends of color have and that they have taught us about. And so it was a really beautiful time tonight. It was very awkward, and I don't think I said everything right, and I don't know that he asked everything right, and probably made a muddy mess of it all, but it was worth at least getting it out there that we were trying to acknowledge. And I think as my oldest has recently turned 13, I think this is the right time, and maybe it should have been done earlier. We've been through a very big health journey these past 2 years, so maybe we're catching up and getting to a place of stability where we can focus on other things than immediate health concerns. But we had a conversation tonight about experiences that our friends have had, experiences that we've seen on the news in recent days with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And, tonight, one of our medical caregivers that came into our home tonight, a wonderful gentleman that we have grown to love as part of our family the past few years, said, he even had an experience on the way to our house tonight, which is a normal thing for him. He's here at least once a week, sometimes more. But he had a moment of an experience on the way tonight, and it kind of shook us to the core that it's hit home. And when we talk to our friends of color from church or from just our neighborhood, and we get that same experience that there's all of these experiences that I've never had, and wanted to just instill in my son that you know you have these. We didn't ask for it, don't necessarily want it. We wish our friends could have it, but there's this thing that comes with this that's different. So what do we do with it? And so, we talked about it, and we talked about the sadness of it. We talked about how God is beautiful and creating everyone um, the same in His image, and how this was never the plan. That sin entered the world, and this all became the plan, and how Jesus came to reconcile us all. Jesus prayed that we may be one in Him, and we talk about how we live that out, in our lives. And so I know I'm stumbling through this. I stumbled through this with him, but I thought it was important to kind of add some background and context to the blog that I wrote earlier that kind of lays this out a little more succinctly. And so it's heavy, it's important. We got to acknowledge it. We got to talk about it. And I challenge dads that look like me, families that look like me, have this conversation. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just talk about it. And so I'll end this. I ended it with him the same way I'm going to end it here, is that I hope that this is the first in a series of open, uncomfortable, messy conversations and discussions on this topic that we can explore together. But then I told him, I said, now that you know about it, and you know that we need to address it, and we need to continue to address it, what are you going to do with it? So that's where I'll leave this right now. Thank you for joining me. Would love for you to follow at afcdad.com or Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram as we navigate this foster care adoption journey with many, many health issues in our family. And thank you for your time tonight.